Maziel Rodriguez Vars, welcome back to the Montclair pod. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So, when last we spoke, you were on the pod during the Montclair Film Festival, and we
Mhm.
screened a documentary, and you were part of the panel for that. It was about a woman named Brenda who had come here, and it was about her journey, and we
Mhm.
got a chance to hear a little bit about her, and wanted to first ask if there are any updates to Brenda's story, and see if there was anything more to share about her or her kids or anything, given the uptick in ICE activity locally and nationally.
Yeah. So, Brenda and her family continue to be contributing members here in Montclair. I think they, like many of the families in Montclair who are caught up in immigration proceedings, are really quite scared and nervous and anxious. And, just the day to day needs of having to get out for work, for groceries, to pick up kids, that has taken on a very different tone and feel because of what we're seeing happening across the country and, even what we're seeing, in communities near Montclair. It certainly creates an enormous amount of fear in folks right now.
I keep on hearing these stories of people that just don't want to drive around
Mhm,
anymore.
mhm.
I heard a story literally 2 hours ago from
Yeah.
somebody who's just like, we're staying home,
Mhm.
and these are people who are refugees. And so I wonder, I imagine you're hearing stories like that too.
Absolutely. We have families who, we've worked with even as recently as just a few months ago who moved to another community that has a higher immigrant population. And the level of stress there is so intense. And it's gotten to the point where they don't want to leave their homes and have decided to just hunker down, which is not an option really, because if you're not working, you can't feed your family. That just starts a whole cycle of instability, of greater instability. But that's literally what people are doing. They really are fearing being out in the streets, being out in the communities. And, even in Montclair, we don't have, I think, that level of, kind of what the activity that you're seeing in some higher immigrant population in higher immigrant communities. But as I said before, the fear is still with you. And so, I know some of the folks who we work with have chosen not to go to grocery stores far away or have stopped going to our food pantries in town, who have stopped, shopping in different areas. They send some people out to get things, but others stay behind. These are the decisions that people are having to make every day. And there are neighbors. So it's
Yeah.
certainly, even though we don't see the activity, the fear is certainly still there for many of the folks who we live with.
Yeah, you mentioned food pantries, and we had heard reports that ICE had been to Tony's Kitchen. I know you had heard those reports too. What did you learn about that?
So I, was around the area when the calls were going around and, went by it myself, did not see anything. So I don't know about that particular incident. I do think that that's another piece that's hard right now. And I think probably by design that you have entire communities that are all just, kind of on guard, and that feeds an anxiety. It feeds like sending messages like, is this ISIS? And I think that is also the intent, is to really sow fear.
Yeah.
And not just among immigrant communities, right? Among all of us.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about how our community is looking with regard to these enforcement actions or, the federal agents coming to town versus a place like Newark, let's
Mhm.
say, or Jersey City, where we're hearing and seeing on like local news broadcasts,
Mhm.
more confrontational incidents.
Absolutely. I think because we don't have a large immigrant population like some of those other communities, we're not seeing in Montclair, kind of a raid coming in at different places. This is not Minneapolis. Our hearts, really go out to the folks there, or in California where, there's just random spots where ICE is showing up and just scooping up folks. That's not happening here. I think from what we know, families who are getting detained by ICE or getting picked up is through a more effort where ICE is identifying them and coming and finding them. And so that's to say that even if we don't have those raids, we do have people who are directly impacted by this administration's tactics and the ways in which they are putting people into the system when really they still have legal rights. And
Yeah.
we've seen firsthand that those legal rights are not being attended to.
Yeah. I mean, and this is because somebody has a parking ticket, or I guess in some cases, I would imagine it's maybe more serious things on their records,
No, I mean,
and they're being identified, or is it just like people have green cards and they're getting picked up
people
anyway?
going in for their check-ins. It's what, what you've seen, and people who are following the procedures and are going in for, a credible fear interview on their asylum case and were detained.
Huh.
That's how our firsthand knowledge of how some people have been detained and picked
So
up.
it's nothing that's happened in their past. These are people who are here with refugee status or temporary protected status.
Some who had protected status, some folks who had released at the border on parole, right? Our personal experience, these were all folks who had, have an open asylum case. And these are folks who really should not have ever been picked up and put in detention.
Can you talk, obviously, MFEE, which you lead, is
Mhm,
devoted to education.
mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about the impact of this situation on kids? What you're seeing most recently in terms of how kids are dealing with this? You talk about
Mhm,
parents that are scared to leave the house. That means
mhm,
they're scared to take their kids to school and things like that.
mhm.
Talk about what you're seeing.
So we hear mixed things from the kids, and the kids, obviously are all, kids are in different situations. But what is most heartbreaking is to hear from kids that there is such a massive effort to demonize them and their families, and that there is an intentional effort to force them out of a country that they really struggled so hard to come to. And that really, I think we all, maybe we don't, hopefully we don't, but we sometimes do take for granted, right? That this is a country that it's founded on this principle of life and liberty, the pursuit of justice. And that is not what we're seeing right now. And the kids absolutely pick up on that and feel it intensely, that this is not a safe place for them anymore.
Yeah.
And I really give a huge amount of credit to our schools, our principals, our superintendent. This is an area that she really does feel very passionate about. Our principals have done, we work closely with the schools in early 2025 to create protocols to support schools and know what to do if ICE shows up. And more importantly, just to, how to be sensitive and supportive of students who have recently come to the US. And the schools are doing a great job. I think it's inevitable that the kids are going to pick up on these really anti-immigrant feelings of, sentiments that are about so rooted in hate.
Yeah.
And it's sad to say, but they are certainly having an impact in terms of sowing fear in the children as well.
Can you talk a little bit about what the schools are doing, what some of the specifics are?
Yeah, so the schools did adopt a set of protocols for what happens, what they can do, because as you're probably aware, right, ICE always had safe zones. There were hospitals and schools, things like food pantries were really off limits for ICE. And that changed once Trump took office. So school districts have been taking it upon themselves to articulate what they can do to keep students safe. So in Montclair, their policy is absolutely not to let anybody in without a warrant. And even with a warrant, I think, the school has a policy of calling their attorney first before letting anybody into the building, which is an important step. Because that's the law, and you want to make sure that your legal counsel has the opportunity to look at a warrant, because as we know, there are differences in warrants, a judicial warrant versus an administrative ICE warrant. An ICE warrant does not give you the legal coverage, the authority to enter into a school building. Having that protocol being explicit and telling schools, what are the steps you follow was really important for giving that guidance and that sense of safety and stability too for the schools. I think where we've seen the fear from families is being out, at a bus stop, walking your kid to and from the bus stop. We know families are really worried about that. Going to a grocery store, those things are real. Those are real concerns. And, as we know in Montclair, our grocery stores are not easy to get to if you don't have a car. So many folks do go to other communities, and they're also taking buses, and that's not always safe.
So if you are a resident that wants to do something to help or if you're a resident that's scared,
Mhm.
talk a little bit about some of the resources and opportunities for both of those groups.
Yeah. So right now, we're actually hosting a meeting next week to work with a collaborative group of organizations in town, especially our faith communities who have also been exploring ways to support our immigrant neighbors. So we are meeting with this coalition that we started in December of 2024, calling folks back in to hear what folks might already be doing, to share a little bit about what we're doing and to share some of the needs that the families that we're working with have identified. And we'll be putting, in terms of MFE, we'll be putting together a list of ways for people to directly help local families. So that should be coming out into, on our website relatively shortly. And then I think I would reach out also to, some of the faith communities that are also actively involved. The UU has an immigrant action team. Union Congregational Church, Reverend Katrina Foreman has been incredibly supportive and has worked with us over the years, but has also worked with other immigrant and refugee organizations across the state. So I would definitely keep an eye out for some of the ways in which local faith communities are also partnering, with some of organizations like us that have direct relationships with families, because one of the things that we're exploring is putting together perhaps, kind of a network of volunteers who would be willing to drive folks to accompany folks to, a bus stop, to just so that folks don't feel as alone. Um, 'Cause that can go a long way to making you feel a little less anxious.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you are an immigrant that is, and you could be a completely documented immigrant and still be scared about this stuff. I have a friend who's fully a citizen, does not want to drive because he was born in Mexico. What can folks like that do if they're looking for help besides just keep their heads down, which I'm sure they're going to do anyway?
Yeah, so we work closely with an organization called Catholic Charities. They're based in Newark, and they do, they provide legal services, but they also have a team of folks who work with refugees and immigrant folks. They've been around for a very long time. And then there's American Friends. There are some other organizations regionally that are taking the call to just help guide people through their situations and to try to connect them to other resources locally. Folks, especially if they have kids in the schools, we'd be happy to talk to anyone to find ways that we can support directly and or connect to these resources as well.
Any stories that you've heard lately, just anecdotally, that you'd like to share that you think are particularly compelling or telling about this situation?
We have had 6 folks in our community who have had been detained. We've been able to help some people get out on bond. We've been able to help some families navigate the really horrible process of detention and having to make some impossible choices. I think when you see what's happening at the national level and you are witnessing it in a family that's right here, right down the road from where we live, that's when it really hits home that even, as I said before, even if we don't, we're not seeing the raids in Montclair, we are absolutely seeing the lack of dignity and lack of humanity in the ways that people are being treated by this system. And we have families whose caregivers aren't at home anymore. They've been in detention for 6 months and their little kids are absolutely traumatized by that and are having to go to school, knowing that they haven't seen their dad in months.
People getting picked up in Montclair, though, as far as you know, or is it happening outside of Montclair? Are there any, like, I know people are, they're going after specific people as opposed to just doing sweeps, it sounds like
Mhm,
what you're
mhm.
saying. Is that happened in Montclair, or are they just getting people when they go in for their appointment somewhere in Newark or somewhere else?
No, we only work with families in Montclair. So these are Montclair families who are going through
And the
this.
pickups are happening, like these, like ICE is going to their houses sometimes?
No, ICE is not going to their house in Montclair. These are mostly through check-ins or through, kind of other situations.
There are these reports, though. We were talking about this last week. Like
Mhm.
everybody's posting ICE seen at the CVS, ICE seen on Park Street or wherever. Like, and now Governor Sherrill talked about last week that the state might stand up a website for people to report this stuff. But there's
Yeah.
always going to be false positives, and like people think it's ICE, but really it's just a guy with a ski mask on because it's 2 degrees outside. Not to mention, who knows if ICE is actually feeding bad information
Mm.
to these platforms. Have you heard about them being in town at all?
No, we've definitely heard, and we get some of those. Some of them, have been credible, and
Mm.
some have not. And I think that's the real challenge as well. I was at a training recently, and the presenter, the community organizer, was sharing that it is really difficult to get the information that you're getting because it's oftentimes, maybe it's a photo, but you don't have an intersection or the agents aren't clearly marked. And so it's not always the most credible information. And you're constantly striking this balance between trying to inform the community, but also not striking panic, right?
Yeah,
And so one of the things that, he was emphasizing at that training is try to look for these things. And I thought it was super helpful training because in just a few moments, she was able to guide folks through like, these are the things that you want to look for before sending it out to a network of friends. And that would really go a long way to helping folks kind of be able to feel a little less anxious because when you're constantly getting these messages, which is absolutely happening in immigrant communities, that starts to really build that anxiety and not make you want to go out of your house. And again, that's why I said I think part of all of this is by design. It's
I
to
can only
make us
imagine.
all uneasy. And so one way to combat that is really to kind of be thoughtful about before we put that message out or spread it, really try as best as possible to verify it.
What are some of those tips that you got in that training to know whether
Yeah.
something's legit or not?
Absolutely. So the organization that led the training was Cosecha. They had a training at the UU last week, and I believe some of those tips might actually be on their website. But he pointed out things like looking for the alphabet soup on an officer's person. So whether it's ICE or ERO, or DHS, and they don't always wear that, but usually there's at least somebody that has some letters that show that they are, kind of there as immigration enforcement. They also said that it would be really helpful if you're either taking a snapshot or a video or you saw the sighting to really, be specific about the location, particularly with pictures. And this was a rapid response training. So this is where, it's pretty important if you're going to send somebody out to go check it out to have that level of information. But I think what's not helpful is hey, I heard this, and then immediately run to social media and put it on there. Because again, that's just really stirring up more panic and not that helpful.
Yeah. And what about, sometimes people hear that ICE is somewhere and then there will be a flood of observers or people who want to document it. They're seeing it probably as standing up to ICE, saying, "Hey,
Mhm.
we don't stand for this, and we're going to stand up for people in a way that is civically responsible and legal." What are some of the pitfalls of that? I guess because sometimes if a bunch of people show up in the wrong place, or like God forbid something happens, like somebody gets shot, like what happened in Minnesota. Any thoughts on that? Have you seen anything like that around here?
I have not seen that here. And I think we do want to be careful. I think it is first, I think we want to be careful about our response as a community. I think it's incredible that, and again, Montclair is such a supportive community. And I think we want to lean into that. And we want to think about how the response can be grounded in the needs of immigrant folks here in Montclair, because it's different, right? This is not the same, as I mentioned before, as other communities. So we really want to think about how the responses really fits the needs here. And then in terms of the, kind of showing up and filming, certainly that is incredibly helpful. It has proven to be very helpful to really hold folks accountable, to hold immigration enforcement agents accountable. I do think we have to do so if one is going to choose to do that. They really have to choose to do that so carefully. And that was what it's also I thought was important about this training was really walking folks through kind of some do's and don'ts to keep themselves safe, to keep the person who might be getting interrogated or detained safe, because as we know, those situations escalate so quickly.
Yeah.
And I hope it's not going to put a chilling effect, which I think is exactly what the intent is. We absolutely need folks to be out there, to be upstanders and to be allies and to document practices that are really egregious and violating people's dignity and rights, we need to keep doing that and we need to do it safely. We've been working with immigrant families for over 4 years, almost 5 years. And while we know it is so hard to be in a new country, especially after you've had a very traumatic journey, and most folks have had pretty traumatic journeys. It's really hard to see that after all of that, some folks are choosing to go back to the countries that persecuted them, where they had no options because
Yeah.
this country is now worse.
Yeah.
And that's hard to see. And that's the reality for many of our Montclair neighbors. That is exactly what is happening. Some are choosing to leave because the situation here is so bad.
Maziel Rodriguez Vares, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you guys reaching out.